Kevin Van Valkenburg is Director of Content at the Fried Egg. You'll know him from No Laying Up, previously from ESPN. I'm delighted to say he's with us now. I, this is an awkward one. I feel like I want to say, hey, KVV, but I really don't know you well enough to lead with that. So, hello, Kevin.
I grant you all permission to use whatever acronyms you would like. So thank you for having me.
Excellent, excellent. We were just talking about Rory there and his cavity back irons, and I was flicking through your pieces on the Fried Egg, and then I saw KVV owns blades. Not because he's, some scratch golfer, but because life is for living.
That's right. I think a lot of people, I think, have been led to believe that you need to play golf trying to maximize every single advantage and trying to shoot the lowest score possible. And I think that this is kind of an American sickness that has maybe taken away some of the overall joy of golf, which is just to enjoy being out there, enjoy the feeling of a pure strike, and just be kind of one with nature and the environment. I mean, there's 500 years of golf history, and cavity backs have only existed for probably 35 or 40 of those. So I think there's nothing wrong with going back to how the game was played for hundreds of years with irons that didn't optimize every single miss hit to go, 175 yards with a 7-iron. I think there's a joy and a simplicity in playing irons that, could have been played by Jack Nicklaus or Tom Watson or, Ernie Els or anybody sort of, prior who really came of age prior to the early 90s. So I just think don't let big equipment people sort of guilt you into playing something if you enjoy playing just the simplicity of what once was.
Yeah, it was such a good point because I've been playing for 15 years and love the game and would never have dreamed of picking up a blade. And then I read your piece and you were saying, God, when you catch one, though, it feels really, really good. And I thought, why have I not done that?
It really does. I think, I can't sit here and tell you that I play with blades every time out, but when I do play with the blades that I have, I don't play worse. I think that's a little bit of marketing trickery to sort of get you to think like, oh, you'll score worse. Like you might hit the occasional shot that is saved by the cavity backs, but you won't score that much worse. You'll find that the blades benefit you in other ways. And this is coming from someone who is a 9-10 handicap. I'm not an elite ball striker, but it really does feel awfully good when you hit one in the center of the face and it goes at a flight that really is unexpected and different than what you'd normally get.
Oh, I'd take your word for it then. I wanted to throw a couple of things at you as the golfing year 2026 cranks into gear. From this vantage point, it is, and to be fair, I think we all realized it in real time. But 2025, for all the ills of the Live PGA Tour fracture, the high points of 25, bookended, I suppose, by McIlroy at Augusta, and then the crescendo that was the Ryder Cup. And you're throwing things like the Open at Portrush in between. Like the high points of 25 were seriously high.
Very much so. I think it was a great year of golf. It was a lot of fun to watch it unfold. I think we'll look back and think about that Masters that Rory won as one of the all-time great Masters and one of the most rewatchable. Obviously, it wasn't the best golf every other hole, but then it was the best golf on certain holes for Rory. And I think a lot of that, you can say who had the better year, Rory or Scottie. I think it's really interesting that it's a debate, right? Like Scottie was clearly the best player in the world, but if you look at the total breadth of what Rory did, winning the Irish Open, winning an away Ryder Cup, completing the career Grand Slam, winning at Pebble Beach, it makes it really interesting. It's kind of a fun discussion of, would you rather have a year where you stacked up accomplishments that didn't really move you emotionally, or would you rather have something that emotionally spoke to a little bit of who you were as a golf fan? And I think what Rory did, at Augusta and the Irish Open and the Ryder Cup just really made me feel things deeply. And I think we'll look back on it as a huge part of Rory's career that really was super meaningful. I mean, he pointed it out in a discussion when he came on the Fried Egg and talked about how the Irish Open, any other year might have been, a monumental emotional thing, and it was kind of got forgotten. But to him, like seeing fathers and sons like hugging each other after he made that final putt to get in the playoff was just really cool for him. And obviously, he even spoke about, I've had a at times complicated relationship with Ireland, and so to see people embracing me and loving me that much felt really kind of cathartic to him.
These are big questions to answer, and we can only sort of hazard a guess from afar. But with a view to 26, what do you think the Masters win in particular? What do you think the Masters win in particular does for McIlroy, the person, like the sense of contentment or otherwise he feels about himself and his life and his career? And what do you think it means for him, the golfer?
I think as a person, it just will make him feel like, okay, like no matter what happens going forward, I have kind of done something that will always be meaningful throughout history. Like it's not just that he won the Masters, which I think is obviously the most important thing. It's that he won a major for the first time in 11 years. It's that he proved to himself that he was on the right path. I think that part of what Rory has wrestled with in the last decade is, can I be good at golf in a different way than I was back in 2015 when I was sort of a ruthless, somewhat selfish, somewhat self-centered person. And now it's, can I be good at golf, great at golf, as sort of a more well-rounded person, as someone who has other interests, who is trying to, find happiness in my personal life. And I think that the Masters win sort of validates some of that theory in those positions. Like, will he rip off another 3-4 majors? I don't know. I think, I would say it's not likely, but it's possible because it certainly has freed him up in a way, as a person and as a golfer, to where there isn't this great burden that is weighing him down on his shoulders. He'll come to Augusta, and I think the odds of a repeat are probably pretty small, right? We're talking about Nicholas and Faldo, two of the only people to, I think, certainly in recent history, to ever win back-to-back Masters. And so, Scottie's going to be sort of playing, I think, at full form. And so that will be a really interesting clash between the two of them, right? Because Scottie is probably the best modern player, if not maybe, we'll look back one day and be like one of the best ever at Augusta. And Rory's obviously been very good there. And so to have potentially a kind of a showdown between the two of them would be great. It'd be great for the sport. It'd be great for Augusta. It'd be just great for even non-golf fans to kind of tune into. So I think our hope as just golf fans would be that Rory will feel freed up and will sort of find a way to, attack majors without any sort of burden hanging over him. I think the reality is probably like he's still going to be nervous. He's still going to feel those butterflies. He's still going to want it a little bit, more than, he'd like to in terms of moments of feeling comfortable.
Yeah.
But it's hard to say that he won't feel freed up in some ways because of that elephant on his shoulders is finally gone.
Yeah. And it really has been such an elephant because, even there's a funny anecdote you tell where you were chatting to Rory and you're talking about Mickelson, and I think you mentioned about how he tried every different approach for Augusta: arrive early, arrive late, think about it, don't think about it, etc. You can completely overthink the place, and McIlroy in that kind of disarming way sort of said, "Whoa, Kevin, a little close to home." So I guess that's all done.
Yeah, I would think so. I mean, it's one of the kind of Rory's charms is he's always been self-aware enough to kind of crack jokes about himself. If he trusts you a little bit and feels like, you're a person of good faith and you're not going to you run and tweet every single thing he says, he'll open up and talk to you about those kind of things. And I think that's what makes him such an inviting athlete to cover and to root for, right? Is that there's a human side there where he's able to acknowledge, like, yeah, I've definitely overthought this. Is him saying, I threw up all over myself, all over the back nine. I really love that because it's an interesting way of admitting, like, yeah, I felt the burden of all this on myself. Most athletes they don't ever want to even acknowledge that in the room because it's like giving life to it. But Rory being like, of course, yeah, I knew that what this meant. And I knew if I was ever going to win the Masters, it was probably going to be like this, where I almost kicked it away 3-4 times.
You mentioned Scotty a few times there, and in winning the Amex at the weekend, he crossed the $100 million prize money barrier. Only McIlroy and Woods have done that. Mickelson was stuck in 96, so Scheffler went over to $101 million earned. Not that really is kind of the key stat. It's his 20th PGA Tour win. He has lifetime exemption now. And I guess, it was in this period of the season last year where he was struggling to come back from injury and McIlroy was starting to win, Pebble and the Players. And there was this, it kind of heightened the pressure almost on McIlroy, this sense that this could be a rare window where Scotty's out of the equation. So now we know as of Sunday, Scotty's back in the equation. And I saw the stat that the gap from Scheffler to McIlroy is the same as the gap in the world rankings, is the same as the gap from McIlroy to Kai Young Kang, who's the 667th best golfer in the world. So that kind of illustrates the point. I watch Scotty and I admire Scotty and I continue to underestimate what I'm seeing and the greatness of what I'm seeing. And I'm angry at myself for that. So thoughts on Scotty and the most underappreciated greatest golfer of his generation we've ever seen.
Yeah, I keep thinking about one of the things that separates Tiger and Scotty, besides the sort of Scotty doesn't have the kind of cultural magnet that Tiger did, where he's bringing in people who were never interested in golf, is that Scotty doesn't make the kind of mistakes where he has to pull off wild recoveries like Tiger did. Part of what made Tiger so exciting is he would occasionally hit these foul balls that would get him into trouble, and then he would have to pull off a magician's act and would do it. And it made you sort of jump off your couch and think, oh my God, this is the most amazing play I've ever seen. Scotty's misses are like to 30 feet. He doesn't have those balls where he has to sort of pull off a magician's act to get out of trouble. He can, as we saw like at the BMW when he chipped in from 75, feet away or whatever. And he will occasionally have to shape a shot around. But for the most part, he's just like a metronome. He's more like Nicklaus in some ways in that he just wears people down. And I hope that part of what makes Scotty more interesting as time goes by is that greatness is always interesting, because greatness at its highest level is sort of unsustainable. And so part of what we are looking at and wanting in Scotty is to see how long can that greatness be sustained. Like you get all kinds of comers who are sort of, they're giving Scotty their best, right? If somebody has the weekend of their life at Augusta and Scotty plays okay, they'll still kind of be evenly matched. And so he is going to take on everyone's best kind of 4 times a year. That's what makes golf kind of interesting, right? Is that even if you are the best player in the game, you're still going to get 1 out of 150 people who plays out of their mind and gives you a true challenge. And how long can Scotty hold off all those people? I think if he gets, 10 wins this year, 2-3 of them majors, all of a sudden it's like, boy, are we living through one of the great careers of all time? And I think that will draw more people in to just see, wow, I got to watch this, because I can't miss my chance at seeing one of the true greats of all time. And that's where I think maybe it will start to appeal to people who otherwise sort of think like, I'm not really interested. He's not a super compelling person.
Yeah. I mean, it would be a pity if he just never seemed to grab people. Where do you think the game is with the view to Live versus the PGA Tour? Like, it's amazing when this Live stuff started. It was like so thrilling and exciting, and like who's going, and it's just the ethics of it being debated, and the ashen-faced Graham McDowell trying to answer those questions, and it was just Greg Norman's standing behind Alan Shipnock. He saw them, not let him in. It was just like the greatest soap opera for about 18 months, and now I just hear any Live talk, PGA talk, and it's like, this is just painful. So it's less interesting to talk about for sure. And then it feels like the damage it has done to the PGA Tour is real. You know, it just feels so fractured. Like this kind of period of the farmers into waste management, Super Bowl weekend, and then you've Pebble, and then you've Riviera, and then Arnold Palmer went to the players. Like it should be such a great time. Uh, the last year, 18 months, I think I, like a lot of people, find it very unappetizing just to watch a standard PGA Tour event. Like it is drifting ever so slowly into the realm of tennis where we come together for the Grand Slams. And maybe in golf there'll always be a handful of other big events. But where are you on like the days of, well, I watch every PGA Tour event and there's loads in them and there's juice and there's characters. I feel the game is in so much trouble. I'm not even sure the game realizes how much trouble it's in that respect.
From my perspective, I think where the game is in trouble is that it doesn't realize what a mistake it is to make everything about money, like about how much you can consume. It's losing touch a little bit with the people who, are feeding the audience of the game. Like if everything is consumption, everything is how much money can I acquire, how much money can I win, it becomes a bit of a turnoff. It becomes less interesting to follow week to week. I don't care if John Rahm has $500 million or Scottie Scheffler does. That doesn't affect my fandom. I care about where these golfers measure up in history. And so I do think that you're correct in that the week to week, it's part of the reason I think Live hasn't, resonated with audiences, because it means nothing. You, as a fan, someone winning $4 or $5 million per tournament does not affect me, does not interest me, because it's all just, theoretical. It doesn't end up in my bank account, doesn't have an effect on my life. And so I think that, yes, the regular season has probably been diminished a bit. I guess I would say on the flip side is that the majors have been elevated a bit. The majors are what truly matters. And so, we ask ourselves, like, what matters in sport? In America, every single baseball game, every single NBA game isn't life or death. It's sort of all part of the story of the season. I think, I don't watch Premier League soccer, but I would imagine that some games are more meaningful than others, right? If you're playing your rival, it means a great deal. And if you're not, it has a less importance. And so it can be healthy, I think, for sport to have its ebbs and flows, to have Pebble mean more and the players mean more. Would it be better if Bryson and John Rahm could participate in the players? I think certainly, like, that would be a different element, a different storyline. And I think it is still possible that we could, come to a moment someday where it is like that, where maybe it's not the players, but it's, there are other events. Maybe it's the Australian Open. Maybe it's things on the DP World Tour. Maybe it's something outside the PGA Tour ecosystem where those things can be elevated. I think, there's a lot of talk kind of bubbling about what's going. I mean, there's a Financial Times story this week about how the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia is reassessing a lot of its financial priorities. They had to scale back a bunch of their investments in Neom, this city kind of that they're building, on the Gulf and trying to turn into modern Dubai, or, and I think with some of that is going to come like an assessment of, like, is this golf product working? I think you can make a pretty good case that investing in F1, investing in buying up the WWE, the wrestling program in the United States, investing in Newcastle, like, those are been solid investments for the PIF. We haven't really seen any return from Live Golf. All we've seen is like $5 million hole that has, they keep saying that these teams are going to be worth, $1 billion at some point. Well, if that were true, I think that there would be more interested investors in those kind of things. There'd be someone coming forward at this point saying, yeah, I'd love to own the High Flyers. I'd love to own the Four Aces. I'd love a piece of that. If that never evolves, I could very easily see the Kingdom pulling the ripcord on this and saying, we're not going to keep doing this. And that is part of, what happens, I think, in that world, is like, it takes one person to fall out of favor with MBS, if Yasser suddenly falls out of favor, it's like, hey, we're not doing this anymore. Liv could go away tomorrow. They're not going to have any emotional investment of like, hey, let's save face and ego. Like, and so that's what I would sort of be concerned about if I were the people who had chosen the Liv stuff. Yeah, I think you're seeing more and more players start to realize, and Rory mentioned this last night, maybe they're not getting exactly what they hoped out of TG or of Liv. Greg Norman had promised we'll get ranking points eventually. Like this will be a feeder system in this. And they stopped being able to pick off the top players. I think Liv has made a good long-term investment if they stick around in some of these young guys. That's where it could really become an actual tour that you could find interest in following. But when it was sort of filled with has-beens, seat fillers, and then the occasional superstar here, that wasn't really that much more compelling than, or at all more compelling than the PGA Tour product. So where it's going to go, I think it's always impossible to predict. Like, yeah, there's still so much money behind it that you could say they could continue to fund it for another 10 years. But I kind of just try to tend to take the position that it elevates the majors, and those are what really matters for history anyway. That's the reason why I started following golf. So I'll enjoy those when I can.
Yeah. You Freudian almost mentioned TGL there. So like even over here, we had McIlroy's Boston team against Shane Lowry's team last night. So like, kind of a fairly healthy golf interest here, to say the least. That should have had some kind of interest, and I don't think it really did. Is TGL, I don't know how you judge this, like people around the office, or just, I don't know, your buddies texting your group. Is TGL making inroads, do you suspect, or not really?
I don't see it making inroads. I don't feel like it's a long-term viable winner. Now, again, like egos can support something for a long time, but you're looking at, a 2,000 seat stadium that's not selling out. You have the Grand Slam winner, the Masters winner there, and it's $200 to go see him, and people are not interested in filling up that little stadium. I think that's a pretty good sign that, the ratings are down this year from where they were. That you can support a lot of stuff if you get 1 million people watching it every week, but we're now dipping every week under 1 million people. I just don't know what it is that is going to make it resonate. I think one of the mistakes that TGL sort of made is not leaning into the absurd. They've done it a little bit more this season, and I guess it hasn't really resonated, more viewers, but these holes where it's like an apocalyptic wasteland, or you have to hit a shot that flies under, the arches of a national park in some ways. Like, if you made it more like a video game, I think there will be something different there. There's something interesting, something goofy, but there's a lot of it that just tried to make it like regular golf on the screen. And I don't know that was the correct approach. You could tell me that 13-year-old boys would love to see him play through like a zombie wasteland and take it as seriously as they could, and that would be sort of fun, but that's not the direction that they chose.
Yeah. I have two quick last ones. I saw you, like a lot of people, I guess, touching on Tiger at 50 on the fried egg.
Yeah.
And, it's as all kind of interesting pieces, it kind of weaves in and out of sport, and, you're kind of wondering, God, does Tiger think it all went too fast? You remember being, was it 19 in 1997, and went too fast for you, so I presume it did for him. But you say later on in the piece, now when Tiger limps around the course or winces in pain but soldiers on, stubborn as ever, I think, yeah, I know that guy. It's probably one of the reasons I like Tiger more now than I did when I was young. So
yeah,
Tiger more now than ever.
I think there is a perspective and maturity that comes with age. I think it is hard to root for someone who seems like a godlike figure sometimes. It seems unrealistic or untouchable. You can appreciate it, and I think I very much appreciated how great Tiger was when he was younger, but I think I sort of understand what it's like to be him, which is an absurd sentence to say out loud, but better now that I'm creeping up towards 50. Like, you climb out of bed some mornings and your knee hurts for reasons that you can't explain. You know, your body aches in places that you've never really thought it could ache before. And certainly Tiger having undergone, 24 surgeries, that's probably true. I think what's also interesting is I've grown to admire just the tenacity of like, hey, I like doing this. I'm probably not going to be as great as I ever was, but I would like to be as great as I possibly can right now. And if that means just hitting balls and making cuts, there's an appreciation and a joy of just doing something that you love that I think we kind of overlook. It makes us uncomfortable as fans to see someone who is diminished in their old age, but for that person, it's still something that they love. And so I think watching Tiger, if he's able to play on the Champions Tour, would be kind of fun, because I think he's learned, you see it occasionally now, to not treat every shot like life or death, to smile a little bit, to enjoy the experience. And I think that there would be some of that on the Champions Tour, to be like, hey, this is still something that I get a lot of joy out of, and I hope that people get some joy out of watching me do it. So why not just enjoy the stroll a little bit? Maybe we get back a little bit to the Blades conversation of something. The feeling of doing something is maybe just as important, if not more so, than the result.
Yeah, because I know you were a Phil guy.
Yeah.
And it is. I don't think it's rose tinted. I mean, it may be, but I don't think it's rose tinted to kind of note that God, even the 2010s for golf, a lot of fun characters, and I appreciate you have to give the newer generation time to make their mark and make mistakes and say interesting things, and we'll grow to get to know them. But like, you think so recently it was Tiger, who was, super interesting through the 10s. I mean, and, culminating in 19, but like all the way through it was interesting. Phil off the charts, just off the charts. I mean, it was the greatest decade we'll ever see. You've Rory on the scene. You've Spieth, who, kind of hard to explain to people outside of golf how electric Spieth was in 15 to, you've Ricky Fowler and the kids. You've Brooks, who kind of arrives jock and mean, but then wins majors. You've Bubba Watson. You've DJ, who's kind of interesting. You've got Poulter and Westwood. Harrington, we just love what he brings to the party. You've characters in there like Stenson, loses all his money, comes back, only hits a 3-wood. Adam Scott, Finau, Sergio, love him or loathe him, McDowell. You're out there and you're on the ground and you're covering it. I'm not getting the same, you as a writer maybe would think in these terms. That cast of characters, it went pretty deep. I'm not saying there's not a good kind of front row of people for you to choose from now, but at the moment, I'm not seeing that depth of like, oh, these are interesting.
Yeah. I think that what you say is correct, and that it is how I view it. Is like, boy, we had it good for a while there. We really had a lot of great storylines in the changing of generations. I think what I often try to think about as a journalist and to try to keep into perspective is that you can kind of really fail yourself a little bit by always lamenting for like what was when you kind of came of age, because for younger people who are in their teens or their 20s who are just getting into golf, they might view it differently. They might be like, boy, I love watching Scottie. I can't wait until Luke Clanton or Caleb Surratt or, Blades Brown becomes of age. And you have to kind of allow yourself to appreciate what's coming next, because even before you talk about like the time of 2015, in 2009, there were people who were sort of saying, boy, this next generation is not really as compelling as Tiger and Ernie. And, they were sort of, taking the torch from the Greg Normans and Nick Faldos, and it'll never be as good as it was, with Faldo and Azinger and the Ryder Cup and back and forth. And then like Rory came along and Spieth came along, and it was really compelling. And Brooks then all of a sudden like burst into the sort of narrative. And that will happen in sports. It kind of always does. In basketball, in soccer, in football. Like when I was watching American football growing up, I thought like, boy, no one will ever be as good as Joe Montana. And then Patrick Mahomes came along, and then Josh Allen came along, and Lamar Jackson came along, and they were compelling in different ways. It's probably like, I don't want to embarrass myself by trying to get deep into soccer, but before like Messi and Ronaldo came along, there was probably like, oh, no one will ever make me feel something like George Best did, right? And so I think you just have to guard against this idea of like, oh, the past is as good as it's ever going to get in terms of like storylines and characters. Well, like you can, if as long as you're open to what comes next, like those can be just as interesting and compelling in their own different ways.
Yeah. I mean, intellectually, I know you're right, but deep down, I feel you're wrong. I feel you're so wrong. Very, very last one then. Just, I don't even know really what the question is, but I suppose it's worth remarking as we look ahead to 2026, the extent to which Donald Trump has gone from golf pariah to like live PGA Tour, Irish Open. He's like he's back inside the tent and more. It's just so it's so striking. Yeah. That's all I have to say about that, Kevin.
He has a certain point of view of golf that just we don't even have to bring up politics. We can just talk about golf that I don't particularly agree with. He wants golf to be an elite sport that is played. He said it should be an aspirational sport that not everyone can afford to play, that not everyone can sort of you should want to aspire to be a part of that. And I don't know if a lot of your listeners are probably not aware, but he's trying to take over essentially these 3 courses in Washington D.C. and turn one of them into kind of an elite high level resort course that could cost $500 $1,000 to play. And it rips right into the heart of like what golf is and who it should be for. And I think takes it about as far away possibly from the original sort of Scottish Irish model of this is a sport that you play with your family, your community, your friends, and it is a unifier, not something that kind of puts up division lines between us. And I don't know what the answer is in terms of whether he'll be able to pull off some of this stuff, but it's certainly discouraging to see the way that they've approached some of how they view golf and what he wants it to be.
Yeah. How many majors am I putting you down for Scottie this year?
I think 2. I think he's going to clean up. I think he would probably win about 6 PGAs over the course of his career. Like they're just not going to really ever make setups that are going to be able to challenge him. He's going to be hard to beat at Augusta. I do not think that we will see him win the Grand Slam at Shinnecock this year. For whatever reason, like I think he's going to need a couple cracks at that. Shinnecock is one of the great courses in terms of challenging lots of people, and they're going to set it up tough, I'm sure. He has been decent at US Opens, but he hasn't quite figured out a way to break through. Pinehurst kind of obviously gave him some fits last year. And so I'm just going to sort of couch it a little bit and saying like, I think 2 is a good number. But would 3 surprise you really? Like he's that good. And if he did win 3, and all of a sudden a lot of people are perking up and be like, I got to have a front row seat for this because this might never happen. I missed, there's people who are saying, I missed Tiger. Maybe now I should pay attention because this is kind of the next best thing.
Yeah. Listen, brilliant. So good to get your thoughts ahead of 2026. Yeah. Let's check in the odd time and see what you make of what's going on. But Kevin Van Valkenburg, who is Director of Content at The Fried Egg, which you should check out as well. Kevin, real pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you.